Chapter 1. The Chains of Time. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of Mount Ilarion, whispering secrets long forgotten by the world below. Snowflakes whirled like lost souls, swirling around the solitary figure bound to the mountain's heart. Her wrists and ankles were encased in ancient shackles, etched with runes that pulsed faintly beneath layers of ice. A chain, black as midnight, stretched from her limbs into the stone itself, anchoring her to the mountain's cruel embrace. Erin had long since lost count of the centuries. Time had become an indistinct blur, broken only by the turning of the seasons. The sun rose and set, casting golden hues upon the frozen landscape, and the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, yet she remained, a prisoner of fate, a relic of a past no one remembered. Her once vibrant auburn hair had dulled, her eyes, the color of storm-churned seas, had grown weary. But her spirit, though frayed, had not broken. She had once been more than this, more than a forgotten myth. A princess, a warrior, a guardian of realms. But betrayal had sealed her fate, and the gods had cast their judgment, binding her to the mountain as punishment for sins she had not committed. The curse forbade her release, and no force, no magic, no divine plea had yet broken the chains. And so she remained alone, enduring the solitude, the cold, the silence. Till now. Erin stirred as the whisper of footsteps crunched against the frost-covered ground. A shadow moved between the boulders, cautious but determined. Her gaze sharpened. A traveler? No soul dared ascend these treacherous heights. The storm was merciless, and yet, someone approached. Erin straightened, the chains rattling in protest. Her voice, hoarse from disuse, barely carried over the howling wind. Who goes there? A figure emerged from the storm. A man clad in furs and leather, his breath visible in the frigid air. His dark hair was damp with snow, and his golden eyes gleamed with a mix of wonder and apprehension. He was human. And for the first time in centuries, Erin felt the threads of fate shift. Chapter 2. The First Touch. The man hesitated at the edge of the clearing, his gaze locking onto Erin's shackled form. His expression was unreadable, a mix of fascination and caution, as if he had stepped into the pages of a legend and did not know whether to believe it. Erin lifted her chin despite the cold that bit at her skin. You should not be here. He took a tentative step forward. Neither should you. A breath of wry amusement escaped her lips. You assume I have a choice. The man studied the chains, tracing the runes with his gaze but careful not to touch them. These markings, they are ancient. Older than any I have seen. Erin's throat tightened. Do you know them? He shook his head. No. But I have spent my life studying lost things. He stepped closer, cautious but resolute. My name is Kale. Erin. His brow furrowed slightly, recognition flickering in his eyes. Erin, as in the fallen guardian? She did not flinch, though the name was like an old wound reopening. So, my story still lingers in some corners of the world. Kale nodded. Barely. Most consider it a myth. He exhaled, his breath misting between them. I did not believe it myself. Not until now. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and the weight of time. Then Kale did something unexpected. He reached out. Erin's pulse quickened. Don't. But it was too late. His fingertips brushed against her wrist, against the cold iron of her shackles. A blinding surge of light erupted from the runes, flaring with a force that sent Kale stumbling back. The mountain trembled, the wind roared, and the very air around them crackled with raw energy. Erin gasped as something inside her shifted, the chains that had bound her for centuries suddenly weakening, fracturing. Then with a deafening crack, the first shackle shattered. Erin's breath came in sharp bursts, her heart pounding. She lifted her gaze to Kale, who stared in shock at what he had done. For the first time in centuries, hope ignited in Erin's chest. And it had come from a single human touch. Chapter 3. The Awakening. The moment his fingers brushed against the cold iron shackles, a blinding light erupted from the mountain's peak. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the stone beneath his feet. The chains glowed red-hot for a brief moment before they shattered into dust, scattering like embers in the wind. A gasp, ragged, desperate, escaped the woman's lips as she fell forward, freed from centuries of imprisonment. Her once pristine gown was in tatters, her skin streaked with the grime of age-old sorrow. But her eyes, golden and burning like the heart of the sun, locked onto his, filled with disbelief in something deeper, something ancient. Her voice was hoarse like a long-forgotten whisper carried on the wind. What have you done? The young man, Elias, staggered back, heart hammering in his chest. He had been drawn to the mountain by something inexplicable, a pull deep in his soul that led him through the dense forest and up the treacherous path. Now, standing before the woman who had been little more than a myth, he realized he had changed something irrevocable. I don't know, he admitted, eyes darting to the crumbled remains of the chains. Who are you? She pushed herself upright, shoulders trembling as if relearning the weight of her own body. I am Celine, guardian of the veil. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I was bound here to hold back the darkness. And now, she turned, eyes widening as she looked toward the sky. The stars above swirled unnaturally, shifting in ominous patterns. A shadow slithered across the moon. Now it is free. A chill settled over Elias as he followed her gaze. He had not just freed a prisoner. He had broken a seal. Chapter 4, Echoes of the Past. Celine's legs nearly gave out beneath her, but she steadied herself against the jagged rocks, inhaling deeply. The wind carried whispers, memories of the past, reminding her of what had been sealed away with her. Her golden eyes darkened with sorrow. Elias watched her, torn between awe and fear. What darkness? He asked, barely able to keep his voice steady. What was bound here with you? She turned to him, and for the first time her expression softened. A god of shadows. A force that consumes. Elias swallowed hard. And now it's awakening. Celine closed her eyes, listening to the tremors beneath the earth, the distant wail of something hungry. The seal should have lasted longer. I should have lasted longer. He clenched his fists. Then we have to stop it. A bitter smile touched her lips. You do not know what you are saying, mortal. Maybe not. But if I set this thing free, I have to help fix it. His voice was firm, resolute. Tell me how. Celine studied him as if seeing something in him even he did not yet understand. Finally, she reached out, pressing a trembling hand to his forehead. The moment her skin met his, a flood of images filled his mind. Ancient battles, cities swallowed by darkness, the desperate struggle of a goddess bound to the mountain to protect the world. Elias staggered, gasping. He understood now. He saw what she had been protecting them from. And he saw what it would take to stop it. Then we must hurry, Celine said. The shadow god is stirring. Chapter 5, The Echo of Chains. The wind howled through the mountain pass, carrying whispers of forgotten time. Elindra, free from her ancient bonds, stared at her trembling hands. They no longer bore the weight of iron, yet the ghost of the chains still clung to her skin. She turned to Alden, the human who had freed her, his breath misting in the cold air. What have you done? Her voice was both a whisper and a roar, layered with centuries of pain. Alden took a step back. I just wanted to help. I didn't know. She looked past him, past the ruined altar of her imprisonment and toward the valley below. The sky shimmered with the first hints of dawn, but to Elindra, the breaking of a new day meant uncertainty. You have no idea what you've set loose, she said, her golden eyes narrowing. There are forces in this world that do not forgive. Alden swallowed. Then help me understand. Who put you here? Why? Elindra turned, her raven-black hair catching in the wind like a dark banner. Once I was a guardian of these lands. A being of fire and storm. The people worshipped me until they feared me. Until they betrayed me. She walked forward and Alden felt the ground shudder beneath her bare feet. The priests of the old world, they bound me here with spells woven in blood. They claimed it was justice. That I had grown too powerful, too wrathful. Her voice wavered and for a moment, Alden glimpsed something beneath her anger, grief. But I was only protecting them. Alden hesitated, then asked, and now? What happens now that you're free? Elindra closed her eyes. The world has forgotten me. But the gods, they will not. I must prepare. A heavy silence stretched between them, and then from the valley below, a low rumble echoed upward. Elindra's eyes snapped open. They know. Chapter 6, Awakening. The sky darkened unnaturally fast. Clouds spiraled overhead, and the earth groaned as if something ancient stirred beneath it. Alden turned to the horizon, where a shimmering distortion cracked the air like fractured glass. Is that He started, but Elindra was already moving. "The veil is breaking," she muttered, urgency in her tone. The moment the chains fell, the gods took notice. "They will come." Alden felt the weight of his mistake settle in his chest. He had thought he was saving someone. He hadn't realized he was setting the stage for something far greater. "We need to leave." Elindra looked at him, a slow smile curving her lips. "You think running will save you?" She turned to face the coming storm. "No human. We fight." A bolt of silver lightning split the sky, striking the peak of the mountain and sending a shockwave through the air. Alden fell to his knees, his ears ringing. From the heart of the storm, figures began to emerge, their forms shifting between light and shadow, their eyes burning like twin suns. Elindra clenched her fists and fire licked up her arms. "The gods once feared me enough to chain me to a mountain for eternity. Let's remind them why." The first of the divine beings descended, their voices rolling like thunder. "Elindra of the storm, your time is over. Submit and return to your prison." Alden scrambled to his feet, watching as Elindra stood tall, flames dancing at her fingertips. "No chains will ever hold me again." Then the battle began. Chapter 7: Echoes of the Past. The first thing she noticed was the warmth. For centuries the stone had been her prison, cold, unyielding, and silent. But now warmth spread through her limbs, her fingers twitching as sensation returned. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises like molten gold. The human who had freed her stood frozen, his breath shallow, his hand still hovering where it had touched her wrist. He looked young, perhaps in his 20s, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of a soul much older. "You." Her voice was hoarse, a whisper dragged from the depths of time. The human flinched. "You can talk?" A wry smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Of course I can talk. I was merely trapped." She looked down at her wrist where the ancient chains had crumbled to dust. "You set me free." His brows knitted together. I didn't mean to. I was just..." He glanced at the ruins around them, the remnants of what had once been a temple before time and nature had reclaimed it. "Exploring." Her gaze darkened. "Your kind always explores where they should not." He took a step back, but something in her expression softened. She did not blame him. He had broken her curse after all. "What is your name?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Elias. Elias." She tasted the name on her tongue, rolling it like a stone in her mouth. Felt strange new. "I am Lasara." His eyes widened slightly. "Lasara? That's the name in the old legends. The Titan of the mountain." "Not a Titan." She shook her head. "A guardian. I was bound here to protect something. But my prison became my grave." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Then, does that mean something's still here?" A gust of wind howled through the ruins, carrying whispers from the past. Lasara turned her head toward the shadows at the edge of the temple, where the air shimmered with something unseen. "Perhaps," she murmured. "Or perhaps my task is not yet finished." Chapter 8: The Awakening. The mountain groaned. Elias staggered back as cracks spread through the ancient stones beneath their feet. The very earth seemed to pulse as if waking from a long slumber. Lasara inhaled deeply, rolling her shoulders, feeling the weight of centuries lift from her body. Strength flooded her veins, the forgotten power of an ancient guardian stirring once more. Elias reached for her arm. "Is this supposed to happen?" She closed her eyes, listening, not with her ears but with something deeper. "The curse has been broken. But something else is stirring." The ground rumbled again, and from the temple's ruins, a sound like grinding stone echoed in the air. A low, guttural growl. Elias turned pale. "That doesn't sound good." Lasara's golden eyes gleamed. "No, it does not." A shadow began to rise from the cracks, taking shape, something massive, ancient, and angry. It had been waiting, buried beneath the mountain, kept in slumber by the same magic that had bound Lasara. Now it was waking. And the battle was only beginning. Chapter 9: The Awakening. The wind howled through the mountain pass as Elias stood before the statue, his heart pounding. He had not expected anything to happen when he brushed the stone woman's cheek, but the moment his fingers made contact, the rock split with a deafening crack. He stumbled back as golden light poured from the fissures in the statue, illuminating the darkened sky. The stone crumbled away, revealing a figure beneath, A woman, draped in tattered silks that shimmered unnaturally despite their age. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, her amber eyes wide with shock and something deeper, something ancient. Elias couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He had freed her. She gasped, stumbling forward as if learning how to stand again. Then she looked at him. You, she whispered, her voice hoarse from centuries of silence. Elias swallowed hard. Me? You broke the curse, she said, stepping toward him. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, touching his face in wonder. Before he could respond, a tremor shook the mountain. The earth rumbled, deep and furious. A shadow passed over the moon. He's coming, the woman breathed, fear flashing in her eyes. Elias's blood turned to ice. Who? She met his gaze, the weight of her words pressing into his soul. The one who cursed me. Chapter 10. The Cursed One returns. The sky darkened as a cold wind rushed through the valley. The woman's gaze darted around, her breath quick and panicked. Elias tried to steady himself. Who cursed you? She turned to him, eyes full of sorrow. A god. One who does not forgive. A bolt of lightning split the sky, and the air shimmered with an unseen force. A voice, deep and cruel, echoed through the mountains. So, you have awakened, little one. The very ground beneath them seemed to recoil at the sound. Elias turned to see a figure materializing from the shadows. Cloaked in flowing black robes, his silver eyes burned with malice. The woman, no longer bound in stone, stepped in front of Elias. I am no longer yours to keep imprisoned, Varos. The god Varos smirked. Is that what you believe? His gaze flickered to Elias. And you, the mortal fool who freed her. Elias felt an invisible force tighten around his throat. He gasped, but the woman moved swiftly, raising a trembling hand. A golden light flared from her palm, breaking Varos's hold. Varos snarled. You dare defy me again? She straightened, her fear giving way to resolve. I do. Elias looked between them, his pulse racing. He had no idea what kind of war he had just stepped into, but there was no turning back now. Varos raised his hand and the sky roared with power. The battle had begun. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Past. The moment his fingers grazed her wrist, the chains shattered into dust, dissolving into the wind like whispers of a forgotten past. The woman collapsed, her legs too weak to support her after centuries of stillness. He caught her before she hit the ground, his heart hammering against his ribs. Freed me, she murmured, her voice raw from disuse. Her eyes, a swirling mixture of gold and stormy gray, locked onto his. Who are you? My name is Elias, he said, barely above a whisper. And you, who are you? She hesitated as if the answer was buried beneath the weight of time. Then a flicker of remembrance crossed her face. Celine, she breathed. I was once. Before she could finish, the mountain trembled beneath them. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the valley. Elias turned just in time to see shadows rising from the broken chains, twisting into monstrous shapes with glowing red eyes. You should not have freed me, Celine whispered, gripping his arm. Now they will come for us both. Chapter 12. The Curse Awakens. The air grew heavy with darkness, pressing against Elias's chest like an iron weight. The shadows lunged and instinct took over. He pulled Celine close and stumbled back. You must run, she urged. Not without you, Elias shot back. Celine clenched her fists, summoning the remnants of power buried deep within her. Golden sparks flickered around her fingertips. It had been so long, too long. She had once been a goddess of light, a guardian of the mountain, until she was betrayed and imprisoned. The creatures lunged. Celine thrust her hand forward, sending a burst of light into the nearest shadow. It shrieked and disintegrated, but the others kept coming. We can't fight them all, Elias warned. What do they want? Celine's breath hitched. Revenge. I was not the only one bound here. The others, they were turned into these monsters, and they will not rest until I suffer the same fate. Elias tightened his grip on her wrist. Then we'll find a way to break the curse, for all of you. Celine stared at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she nodded. Together they turned and ran. Toward the unknown, toward the answers buried in the ruins of time.